right, good evening everyone. Thank you so much sa lahat ng mga nag-join sa atin. Again, today we're joined by one of your favorite regular guests. I'm super thankful to this great person for being our regular guest, Justice Carpio. Thank you so much, former Associate Justice Carpio, for joining us as always.
To our viewers for listening to us again.
Thank you very much, Justice. So it looks like my internet is not as good as always because I'm here in Baguio, but I hope enough gets through. Important naman, as long as you're there and you say something, it has authority. Justice, there's so much to discuss, obviously, about Dutertes, Trillanes, Chinese espionage rings and networks. Some of them have been already openly, more or less, identified by media. Pero simula muna tayo sa West Philippine Sea. Of course, this is where you and I, our hearts and minds have been invested in for a long time. You are an authority on West Philippine Sea issue. What is the context of what happened recently? Because I don't want to name names, but you know who are these trolls, these paid trolls? They're saying, oh, when it comes naman to airspace, wala naman tayo jurisdiction dyan. Hindi naman natin na-establish na may jurisdiction tayo over the airspace in the West Philippine Sea or over Scarborough Shoal. At hindi naman nakasaad dyan sa on-clause na dapat sa atin yung airspace. So in effect, China has every right to go there, and if they believe we are violating their claims, then they're more than free to to intimidate us. First of all, what does the United Nations Convention of the Sea and prevailing international law say about jurisdiction in the airspace? And then perhaps we can talk about jurisdiction over airspace in our exclusive economic zone and over contested territory like the Panatag Shoal, Scarborough Shoal.
Well, in the territorial airspace, that means the airspace above the land territory and above the territorial sea, there is no innocent passage. There's no freedom of overflight. I mean, you can pass through the territorial airspace of another country only with the consent of that country. Now, in the exclusive economic zone, there is freedom of overflight. Anyone can fly, and you don't have to get the permission of any country to fly over the exclusive economic zone airspace. That's the above the EEZ. Now, assuming that what happened recently when the flares were dropped on our reconnaissance plane, if that happened within the airspace above the exclusive economic zone, then China was at fault because there is freedom of overflight over the exclusive economic zone. Now, if it happened over the territorial airspace of Scarborough Shoal, we claim it as our own. China claims it also as its own, and that has not been settled by any tribunal. So that's something that must be settled by arbitration if we can bring China to arbitration. But we can do the same to China. We can drop flares if we want to. But because there is no definite ruling by any tribunal, but in the context of safety, you just do not drop flares on another plane, because that would surely that could cause the other plane to fly out of control. No, so they could have just warned, or considering that the airspace is disputed, then they should not do anything that would aggravate the situation. So, but what do we do now? Because we claim the Scarborough Shoal as our territory. It's above water at high tide, so it is territory. There is a territorial airspace. There's a 12 nautical mile territorial sea. What we should do is to voluntary arbitration. Announce to the world that we are challenging China to submit to arbitration, who has sovereignty and ownership over Scarborough Shoal. Uh, China, of course, will not agree because they know they will lose in that arbitration. But we should challenge China. And
Oh,
China refuses to
right.
submit to arbitration. Uh, we will be following the UN Charter because all disputes must be settled by peaceful means, and arbitration is a peaceful means. So what China is doing is unfriendly and uh, aggressive move by dropping flares. We should start at the correct foundation, the correct basis that we challenge China to submit this to voluntary arbitration to prevent precisely dangerous maneuvers like this. So we should not let it pass this way. We should challenge China so that if there is another incident, we can always bring up the fact that we have
Right.
challenged China to submit this to peaceful settlement through arbitration. That's
Uh,
my
right.
recommendation.
So Justice, let me just unpack that a little bit. So on the first level, China is aggressively preventing us from exercising patrol in the airspace in our exclusive economic zone. That's not good. Pangalawa, they're engaging in very dangerous maneuvers that could lead to accidents and endanger the lives of Filipino pilots. That's not good. Pangatlo, even if we were to agree now, this is a disputed territory, which it is, technically speaking, because the final status has not been resolved by any court because China doesn't want to open up to it. As a Filipino, it is not your job to automatically argue it in China's behalf, right? I mean, like, yes, you can accept that it's disputed, but to automatically assume that China has the right to be there and to challenge us and do it dangerously, medyo questionable yung ganyan line of argumentation. So sometimes I find it interesting that some pretentious people who, I don't know, attended one or two class in some whatever university, they think now they can lecture us about not asserting any kind of rights and everything like that. But um, Justice, let me also discuss this. This also about China reminding us of its preponderance of military power in the area. And also to a certain degree, China also saying, okay, maybe dyan sa Ayungin Shoal, nagkaroon tayo ng pag-intindi, interim agreement, tawagin natin dyan. Pero hindi pa tapos ang usapan. Pwede namin kayong iipitin sa ibang lugar katulad ng Panatag Shoal. You know, kind of a pinipitik din tayo sa ibang lugar just to remind who's the big boss. Do you think there's also that kind of psychological element and saying just because medyo nag-die down yung tension sa second Tama Shoal, hindi tapos ang laban?
Well, it's possible that it's also possible that uh, because I think the long-term plan of China is to impose an ADIS, an air defense ID zone in that area. This could
Can you
be
explain
one of
that,
the early
Justice? Because
moves.
actually, I wanted to discuss that. What is an air defense identification zone? What is the legal basis for that? And what is the military and operational implications? And what are the examples that we have? Taiwan Straits, East China Sea. Can we explain to people what is this ADIZ, this exclusion zone, aerial exclusion zone that China could impose in this part of the world? And bakit nakakatakot ito?
Well, the ADIS is an area beyond your territorial airspace that you declare to the world that if a foreign aircraft enters that zone, they have to notify you and to tell you what is your intention. Because normally the aircraft is deemed to be going to your territory. It's different if it is just flying uh, on a direction that will not hit the territory. So, but if it is in a direction that will enter your territorial airspace, before it enters, because they fly very fast, you should be forewarned where they're going because 12 nautical miles, that's very short in terms of the flight of a, jet plane. Uh, so these countries have, some countries have created this buffer zone, this air defense ID zone to require other states if these are uh, warplanes, that they should identify themselves and stake their destination. But this is
So it's
outside
supposed
the
to be a,
territorial airspace.
yeah, and
This
this is
is
supposed to
outside
be
the territorial
right.
airspace.
This is outside third, and this is supposed to be as defensive mode, just in case there's a deconfliction or to make sure there's no unnecessary military confrontation. I mean, is that supposed to be the more, I don't know, how should I put
Yes,
the less of aggressive the
yes.
version of
It's
yeah.
like saying you're you're proceeding in our direction. What is your intention? Friendly or hostile? Something like that.
And usually
Uh,
you do that in areas na high tensions, let's say Taiwan Straits or at some
yes,
point in the East China
yeah.
Sea, right?
Japan has declared an ADIS zone. Also, Taiwan has declared an ADIS zone for itself. China has declared also in that area, but in the South China Sea, China has not yet declared. Uh, but we're expecting China to declare. But China will declare if it can enforce it. But they don't have an air and naval base in on Scarborough Shoal, so they'll have a hard time enforcing it.
So they would be able
So
to
I
enforce
think
it if they build military facilities in Scarborough
yes,
and then connect it to the ones in Paracels and Fiery Cross and the rest of the Calayan group of islands,
yes,
right? Yeah.
yeah. If they have an air and naval base, they can enforce their ADs. But right now in that area, Scarborough Shoal area, they cannot enforce it. But that has always been the plan of China to put up an air and naval base on Scarborough Shoal. No, so uh, it's possible that they're thinking of implementing it, but we really don't know when they will implement it. But we know that that is their intention. Uh, well, we had an agreement, so-called agreement on Ayungin Shoal, but I do not see any agreement really because China is saying this is what we agreed upon. And then we're saying, no, this is what we agreed upon. So if there is no agreement, there's no meeting of the minds, then there's no agreement.
We're just
So
talking
that's what
past
I'm
each other,
saying.
essentially. Yeah.
Yeah, I said there's no real agreement because China and the Philippines could not agree on what was agreed upon. So if you cannot, uh, uh, you don't have a meeting of the minds, then there's no agreement.
Baka postmodern to justice, parang let's agree to disagree on the agreement. May pagka meta, like it's postmodern. Like, ano? Let's agree to disagree on the agreement, right? I mean, that's quite an
Yeah,
interesting way of twisting it.
because
Yeah.
I have a I call that that there are three that we must impose that we have to be aware of. I call it the three no's. Uh, we should it we should not give prior notice, no prior notice. That's one to China when we do Aurora. No prior consent. We do not request prior consent, and we do not agree to prior consent. And third is no onboard inspection, no on-site inspection. Three
Right.
no's. So any agreement must follow the three no's. Otherwise, we will be deemed to have conceded part of our
Territory.
sovereign
Right,
rights. Because
exactly.
right now, that is an EEZ. We have a sovereign right to be there to exploit the natural resources. And in fact, there's freedom of navigation there in that area. It's in the exclusive economic zone. So we don't have to ask permission from anybody to be there. And most of all, that is our EEZ. We have the exclusive right to put up structures in that area. So we must be careful that the three no's are observed. Otherwise, China will later say, oh, you agreed to notify us before you can do RORE. So we have some right there already. We cannot do. China is very good at that.
Yeah, that the kind of playing this language games and trying to spin it and twist it. I think the only thing we agreed to accept is exchange of information, right? That's the term that Secretary Manalo used, right? We only exchange information. Can you put that into the legal and diplomatic context?
Well, I have my reservations there because if you do an exchange information before you do Aurore, is as if you are notifying them that
Yeah,
you will do
medyo
Aurora.
thin na yung line masyado. Okay, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. So what I propose is that we can continue with that, but we must do separately our own RORE without an exchange of information, just to show that that is not the practice. Because if we follow exchange of information every time right before we do every RORE, then the Chinese will say, "Oh, that is the practice. You have to inform us." So then
You normalize
we
that.
have
You create
considered.
a new regime. Yeah, you create a new regime that indirectly could affirm China's excessive and baseless claims. Uh,
Yes.
so what should be, why not just generically say we explored de-escalation or conflict management mechanisms without compromising any of our core values? And why not just say that? I mean,
Well,
it's a purely
yeah,
de-escalatory understanding, period. Just that. Nothing else,
yeah.
nothing more.
That is already part of the statement that we do not change our position. We do not give up any of our position. But that is the verbal. That is the written. But the practice on the ground in the sea is that we give prior notice. So what will prevail? The written word, the verbal statement, or the actual practice? Well, we always say action speaks louder than words. So I think we have to be very, very careful here because China did that too. In fact, in the arbitration at The Hague, China said, "Oh, we published the nine dash line long time ago. You did not object. So you have accepted it already."
Good
That was
point.
their
Very good point.
position. But the tribunal said, "Oh, you can publish that domestically, but that is not notice to the world. You have to notify the United Nations before it's considered as a notice to the world." And when you notified the United Nations in 2009, the Philippines, Indonesia, Vietnam promptly protested. So we have to be very careful with these actions of China because later on they'll come back to us. "Oh, uh, that is the practice. You have to inform us before you do Aurora." So we have to be very, very careful with this.
Don't give them an inch. Don't give them an inch in
Yes, because
language, in territory. Exactly.
yeah, because we're talking here of sovereign rights. We cannot play fast and loose on this.
Yeah, and if you give them an inch, they want your whole hand.
Yeah.
Going back to this, should the Philippines also impose its own ADIZ within our exclusive economic zone? I know it sounds crazy because, of course, operationally you have to be able to enforce it. But let's say in theory, if we have sufficient Air Force capability, do you think at some point the Philippines should consider an ADIZ within its own exclusive economic zone? And secondly, isn't what China doing in violation of the declaration and the conduct of parties in the South China Sea? Because I can see it violating at least, Article 3 or 4 of DOC, whereby it proscribes unilateral and aggressive actions that raise tension. So from the angle of ASEAN, raise the DOC, which China signed up to, although it's non-binding, obviously, but still. But also the Philippines, maybe at some point, maybe do our own ADIs in that area. Is that too crazy?
Well, we can if we have the capability uh, to monitor aircraft coming in and get in contact with them and ask their intention, friendly or hostile. So yes, we can do that. It's allowed. There is no prohibition.
Speaking of capability and of course, speaking of guarding our airspace and all of that, of course, US is our top ally, powerful country, which also has an interest in making sure China doesn't turn the South China Sea into a Chinese lake. So kausap ko si Ambassador Romualdez on this show a few days ago, and he said that the Americans are looking at 2.5 to $3 billion in additional funding. So that $500 million FMF is just a beginning of a new chapter. And he's very confident that whoever becomes the next president, whether it's Trump or Kamala, things are moving in that direction. And I raised the issue of F-16 fighters and some of this military hardware, and he was adamant that no, this is just the beginning, that there's a whole package of other defense agreements and acquisitions. We're talking to our American friends. Justice, what is your understanding here in terms of what is the optimal way where we can get sufficient help from Americans, but at the same time not be dependent on them, and at the same time exercise our own strategic autonomy and protect our own sovereignty. What is the balance there between getting the most out of our alliance and at the same time not being too dependent on America and exercising our own strategic agency?
Well, most of the non-communist countries or uh, those that have joined NATO uh, and even countries in Latin America, they would want to buy American fighter jets, but they're pretty expensive. Uh, uh, if we have the money, then we should, because those are the top fighter planes, and if we have to use them, we have to use them against China. 'Cause that's the
Shouldn't US give us discount on or help in maintenance cost and all of that? Because of course it's not just the acquisition cost. Shouldn't they cut us a slack? I mean, we're a frontline state out.
well, they have offered already their F-16s to us, uh, and the F-16s they can always be refurbished. They can be upgraded, uh, and there are many. The European NATO countries are disposing of their F-16s because they're upgrading to the F-35s. But these are
Poland, those
very good fighter
Denmark.
planes. Yeah, these are still good fighter planes, and you can always upgrade them. But they're rather expensive, really, and expensive to maintain. But that's the cost of maintaining your sovereignty, protecting your territory and maritime zones. Uh, so if I would not mind if we get the F-16s. Uh, we can also get the Swedish uh,
Gripens, yeah.
they're also good and uh, less costly to maintain. Give that to the Air Force people,
Mm.
what they want. But I think what we have now, the A50s, they're not really enough.
Yeah, they're
They're
just
not
trainers.
sufficient.
They're upgraded
We have,
trainers.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
they're just upgraded
We
trainers.
have to get the multi-role fighter jets.
And just as you were also among the first to discuss it along with Admiral Ong, another special guest of us always here. Missile systems. You think the Americans should give us Patriot missile systems, HIMARS, Typhoon even maybe at some I mean, isn't that the big game here? I mean, maybe instead of just ADIZ, make sure we have a good coverage of our exclusive economic zone and beyond.
Well, the Malaysians have bought HIMARS, and there's no reason why the Americans will not sell to us, except that now they're in great demand, and the the
Because of
waiting time is
Ukraine.
a little bit long. But yes, we can get HIMARS. In the meantime, the Brahmos are there, and they're also very good. We can order more Brahmos in the meantime, but we can also get the HIMARS. Uh, because the HIMARS are directed at fixed targets, while the BrahMos can be directed at moving targets. No, so uh,
Oh,
but most
you're
of
right.
these,
You're
of
right.
course, the
Each of them.
islands, the air and naval bases of China are fixed in the Spratlys, and uh, so we can use the HIMARS there, especially the long range ones now, the ATACMS. So yes, we should work out a way to get the HIMARS uh, 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 delivered to us. We should acquire HIMARS because they're very good for those stationary air and naval bases in the Spratlys.
Well, the Brahmos will take care of moving targets, could be ships or whatever,
Yeah.
right?
And
So
both of these, the Brahmos and the HIMARS, are mobile. So they very difficult for the Chinese to hit them because they can move, while the Chinese islands are fixed. I mean, they cannot hide.
sitting duck sila in that sense. Sitting
Yes,
duck sila in
they're
that.
sitting duck really, and the HIMARS are very good at that.
We recently had Defense Minister Pistorius of Germany. First time I think ever a German defense minister has visited the Philippines, at least in recent memory. And we're pushing also for defense cooperation with them. That went hand in hand with the first ever joint drills with Japan in the South China Sea, and also we finished the Coast Guard drill with the Vietnamese. How do you put all of these things together? Are they connected? Are there just different pieces coming together at the right time? What can the Germans offer us? What are we looking at in terms of getting from the Germans?
Well, the Germans and most of the Europeans see uh, what's happening in Ukraine as connected to what's happening in the South China Sea, because Russia is trying to overturn the rules-based international order. And that is exactly what China is doing also in the South China Sea, overturning the rules-based international order. Under the UN Charter, all disputes must be settled by peaceful means, uh, outlawing the use of force or the threat of force. Russia is using use of force. In the South China Sea, China is using threat of force, but the end result is the same: to overturn the UN Charter. And if that's overturned, we'll be back to the might is right rule, just like the situation before the UN Charter, which led to two world wars. When if you have a dispute with a state, you can go to war. If you win, then you are rewarded with the territory of that state. Now that's not allowed anymore because the dispute must be settled by peaceful means. And war is not a valid means of acquiring territory now. It's illegal to do that. Otherwise, if we go back to that rule, then we'll have surely a third world war.
Justice, before we transition to domestic politics, I want to talk. After all, you're the former associate justice. I know your comfort zone is where my comfort zone is, which is geopolitics. But this is the Philippines. So before going there, we have the updates. Obviously, you're part of this very much, but I also get an email about the mother of all Philippine maps. It finally has found a home at AIM. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I asked for a personal copy also, of course, replica of that. What's going on with that? And are you happy about it finding a final home finally? You played a very important role in that. Am I seeing that
Yes,
behind you right now? Yeah.
yeah, I was the one who recommended to Mr. Mel Velarde to buy that at auction at Sotheby's.
Is he
And I
a
said,
descendant? Is this a descendant of related ba sila?
father, descendant of Father Pedro Murillo Velarde. That
Oh
was
my
my
God.
line. I said, Mel, you
Wow.
must be a descendant of Father Pedro Murillo Velarde because the friars had the children. So he
Yeah,
was
of
laughing. I
course.
said, so you must
Yeah.
buy it. Of
It was
course,
like seven
he's not
generations.
related, but I said that was one of my come on to him. Look, that's Velarde. You must buy it. So uh, the importance of this map is that it's the first map that gives a name to Scarborough Shoal, Panakot, 1734. I mean, that's over 300 years ago. And also, it shows there that the Spratlys are part of the Philippines as Los Bajos de Paragua. Los Bajos is the Spanish term for shoals, the shoals of Paragua. Paragua is the old name of Palawan during the Spanish regime. The shoals of Palawan, those are the Spratlys. So, uh, and I said that if we put it in the National Library, there's in a permanent gallery, because I didn't want it to be taken out. It has to be permanent because these museums, these galleries will just
You
store
never
it
know.
and have
Exactly.
new ones exhibited. But because students go to the National Library, and when they see the map, they know right away that Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys are part of Philippine territory. You don't have to explain it anymore. It's very visual. So I said we must have that map, and luckily he won that bidding. I told him don't buy higher than 5 million, but I think when he was bidding, he
You went
was
a little bit
drinking
over
wine.
budget. He,
He
he
was
should have
drinking a
sent an
little wine,
Ilocano.
and so he just bidded and bidded up to 12 million.
Baka China pa yung kalaban para lang papahirapan tayo dyan sa map na yan. Um, Again, that's a big news. Congratulations, Justice. You have played a very important role. Just to remind folks, how important are these maps? Obviously, they're important in a psychological sense. They're important in a political sense. In legal terms, how important were they when you prosecuted the case, when you litigated the case of the Philippines at the Court of Peace? I'm sorry, at the Court of Peace at The Hague, essentially. Yeah.
Well, the rule in international law is that the maps do not establish title do not establish sovereignty. However, if the map is attached to a treaty, then the parties are bound. But there is an exception.
Mm.
When the state itself publishes the map, disseminates it against its own interest, then it is bound by that map. There is this case between Malaysia and Singapore. They quarreled over Pedra Blanca. That's the white rock there in the Strait of Malacca. And the Malaysians published a map putting that rock as part of, as a territory of Singapore. And the Singaporeans use this, that, well, you publish it yourself, it's not attached to a treaty, but you're bound by that because you produce it. And the court said, yes, that's an admission against interest. It's binding, even if it's unilaterally made. So we said, we submitted to the tribunal all the ancient maps of China, because the People's Republic of China compiled into a 3-volume atlas of ancient maps in China. And all these dynasty maps of China show that the southernmost territory of China is Hainan. Chinese territory went no further than Hainan. It did not even
This is the
reach the
same map that
Paracels,
Merkel also gave to
much less
China?
the Spratlys.
Is this the same map that
That's why we
Chancellor
said
Merkel? Yeah.
these are the maps of China that China produced and disseminated. China is bound by this. So that's it. And now, there is a law now in China that no Chinese can export a map without the 9-dash line in inset. So their Tang Dynasty map, that's about 1,000 years ago, they put there the 9-dash line, which we all know started only in 1947. So, in the arbitration, of course, it was a maritime dispute. It was not a territorial dispute, but you have to give the bigger picture. In other words, okay, we're talking about the maritime, but the bigger picture includes the territorial, and the Chinese maps, all their dynasty maps, show that Hainan was their southernmost territory. So how can they claim the West Philippine Sea? It's just too far away. I mean, you have to inject this to give the judges an overall picture. And that's exactly what we
So
did.
it was for
It was,
contextualization. Yeah, contextualization.
yes, contextualization. It's basically to educate them that while this is a maritime dispute, but how can China, when they're so far away, based on all the maps, how can they claim waters so far away from their shores?
So
That's exactly what we did.
yeah, that's where the value comes in. But of course, in the case of the Philippines, it's also about instilling patriotism and making sure itong mga makapili, itong mga walang I'm sorry, itong mga bayaran. Oh, I'm sorry, itong mga whatever you want to call them. They'll be laughed at. Justice, to what degree are we making sure that this is embedded in the fabric of our basic education?
Well, that's the thing that I'm trying to propose to the Department of Education, that they should include the arbitral award in history, in the teaching of history, because that's really part of our history now. I mean, the arbitral award affirmed we have a full exclusive economic zone, and it's very interesting because we submitted all these maps. It's the arbitration where the most number of maps were submitted in any international litigation. So, it so happened that in the tribunal there was one judge who was interested in maps, and we learned about this. So we proposed to submit the maps, and he said, "Okay, go ahead." So.
You
So
never
we took
know.
advantage of their interest in maps, and they were so enlightened, and they said, "Oh, China is so far away. It's like Europe. You are a country located in Europe, and you're claiming maritime zones in the Pacific Ocean. It's just like that.
That ridiculous. That ridiculous. Yeah.
Really ridiculous."
And I see the importance of this, Justice. I think we have to be honest about it. When some of our Chinese friends talk, they talk as if they were the only civilized people, and all of us were just a bunch of savages and barbarians. And sometimes they even bluntly spell it out, right? That kind of civilizational arrogance, Middle Kingdom mindset. So when you have maps from the early 18th century or mid 18th century, it's kind of an in-your-face reminder to the rest of the world that we were not a bunch of savages and a bunch of coconuts falling from the tree, right? That we had our own civilization, we had our own treaties and all of that. So I see also the psychological value pushing back again that, kasi naiinis ako sa style ng China, no? Yung parang, they always make it look na sila lang yung civilized na, or our ancestors passed there, whatever. Like, oh wow, Bajaus have been passing there for tens of thousands of years. Oh no, but ours were, they had nice ships and all. And then I say, yeah, but Admiral your greatest admiral, Zhang Hao,
Yeah.
was not even
Yeah.
Chinese. He was a Persianite Central Asian.
Yeah, he was a
Probably
Muslim
look more
guy.
like me than a Chinese. I mean, I would say,
Yeah,
right? That would be
he was a
ridiculous.
Muslim.
He would probably more look like someone like me or someone than a normal Han Chinese. So it's just
and
ridiculous, these claims they're making. Yeah.
this is the kicker, Richard. The term China was invented by the Indians. So if they said, oh, by the name itself, South China Sea, that's ours, then you should belong to India because it was in Sanskrit that you find the first word of China, Chin.
Exactly. And also, di ba, tawag natin sangli, di ba? This
Yeah.
is a kind of a transliteration of Chinese term for merchant, which means the Chinese back then didn't see themselves as part of a China. There was no such thing as China. There was just a emperor there claiming this and that. I mean, there was no constitutive, coherent nation civilization as China. These are all myths, right? I mean, our good friends, there's this great book I suggest people to read, the Invention of China, right? This was a socially constructed nation. It's not true that they were there forever, right? So I think that's where the importance of the map comes in, and this psychological, this almost kind of a arrogant civilizational superiority rhetoric we're hearing from the Chinese. I mean, I find it always funny when our Chinese friends complain about Eurocentrism. I said, well, Eurocentrism, not a fan, but I'm definitely not a fan of Sinocentrism too. They talk as if they're the only civilized people on Earth, or at least in this part of the world, which is so annoying, right? The Japanese are annoyed by that. The Koreans are annoyed by that. Most of us are annoyed by that. So I think that's where also the importance comes in. And that's why mahalaga na basic education pa lang, i-remind natin yung mga kababayan natin na hindi sila mag-isip ng sinocentric na lahat tayo mga savages na umakyat lang ng tapos mga Chinese lang ang may civilization. We have to push back against it, and I think this is where the maps come in. Now, Justice, I'm going to put you a little bit in a different spot. What is your what's happening on the domestic front? Because, one reason perhaps China is feeling very confident in pushing the envelope is because they have friends in the Philippines, right? And some of their friends are really in trouble, right? I mean, what is this Quadcom, this like 4 committees coming together, investigating Duterte and all of that, all of this expose about Bongo and Duterte planning crazy stuff against Trillanes, and Trillanes now coming after that. How are you reading this part? Because I know, Justice, you're a foreign policy, geopolitics guy. Both of us are the same in that sense, but we have to care about domestic politics too, because it affects our foreign policy. The two are very much connected. Do you feel things are moving in the right direction, that the walls are closing in on the people who messed around too much with our sovereignty and sovereign rights back in the day?
Yeah, I think the day of reckoning is coming closer because what I'm hearing is that a warrant of arrest will be issued by the ICC sometime in September, and Congress is now investigating the pogos, the gambling, the human trafficking, and the connection of Michael Young. So it's all coming out now that somehow former
The
President
walls are closing
Duterte,
in. The walls are
yeah,
closing in on these people.
these are all connected to President Duterte. I mean, Michael Young was his economic advisor, very close friend of Duterte. And of course, you see the pictures. The mayor of Bamban was there with more will come out, and many are willing to testify also. So I think we're getting a clearer picture of what happened in the last 6 years.
So the ICC could come more or less before the election starts and before the certificate of candidacy? Because that was the question I had when I was at The Hague the other month. I know it's going to come later this year, but tell me before elections or not. I mean, certificate of candidacy. And somehow I got similar answers. Justice, what about Sara Duterte? Because she's still the vice president. Is she also vulnerable to potential impeachment? Obviously, it's easy to say impeachment is not going to happen based on history, based on schedule, September 30 yata yung break. But we know that there was an exemption made last year whereby hearings can continue beyond September 30 all the way to November. Do you think that there could be also impeachment cases filed against Sara, considering ang daming bases na pwede gamitin to file impeachment at least against her? And then siguro next year na kung aakyat ito sa Senate or anything like that, considering how complicated impeachment is. Or do you think at least just the prospect of impeachment against Sara is something that could keep them honest, if I can put it that way?
Well, it's possible that uh, that some congressmen will file an impeachment case because, of course, if a warrant of arrest is issued against her also, no, and there's the confidential fund, uh, and they're
So ano
asking
mga
now.
grounds, Justice, do you think are because there are multiple grounds for filing impeachment? What are the potential grounds if theoretically a congressman were to file, right, or a citizen were to ask a congressman to file it? I mean, there could be
Well,
many grounds, right? Yeah,
there's a ground of betrayal of public
public
trust.
trust.
That's a
Yeah,
catch-all
exactly.
provision.
Touch all. So
I mean,
medyo malawak.
everything can fall there.
Exactly. So pwede.
So, and the confidential fund is also investigated, being investigated by the House, and they have subpoenaed the records from the COA, how Vice President Duterte spent that $125 million, and uh, and and my group has also filed a case before the Supreme Court questioning the constitutionality of confidential funds. So hopefully that all of this will be resolved in time for the next election, or at least in time for the 2028 election.
And do you think the next election could be Team Philippines versus Team China in those stark terms? I mean, obviously, many will pretend to be Team Philippines dati kay Digong sila. But, I mean, Tolentino resigning from PDP Laban very openly over West Philippine Sea. And can you tell us
Yes,
a little bit about
yes.
the story of Tolentino? Because we wanted to talk about this actually last week, hindi nakatugma yung schedule natin. And what was the Senate debate about maritime boundary delimitation and all of that? If you could educate our friends and audience about that,
Yeah.
Justice.
Well,
This whole
Central
Tolentino affair.
Tolentino is the principal sponsor of the Maritime Zones bill in the Senate, and it was approved by the Senate, approved in the House, and it went to the conference committee, and the conference committee approved the conference report. The House ratified it and sent the conference their enrolled bill to the Senate to be sent to the president, but something happened along the way. And this is a very murky now because some people are saying that the office of the president uh, asked the Senate not to submit the bill for the signature of the president. That's very strange because it was already approved by both houses. Uh, and so there was a second conference to address objections of supposed objections of the office of president, but these objections were never shown to the House. There was a letter circulated, but it was unofficial. Nevertheless, the conference committee met. They tweaked some of the provisions, and then the House ratified it again, and the Senate uh, uh, conference committee report has not been signed as of now, per my latest information, because somebody is holding it again. There is one person who's apparently has the capacity to hold back what has been approved by the entire Senate. It's very strange.
Oh, wait, this is a senator or this is a...
Well, apparently, it's somebody in the Senate who is holding the transmittal of the enrolled bill.
Yeah, I think
So
I know who
it's
you're
very
talking about.
strange. It's very strange. Why would somebody stop it when the president himself said, when he was in Shangri-La, he said, "I will sign the maritime zones bill." And in the SONA, in his State of the Nation address, he again repeated it. "I will sign it." But apparently, somebody is messing up everything, preventing the transmittal of the enrolled bill to the office of the president.
Is this out of personal conviction or potentially undue influence or nefarious foreign influence?
That's
Yeah.
something that we have to
Yeah.
establish, because I
Yeah.
experienced
Yeah.
this kind of guerrilla tactics during the arbitration. There were people trying to sabotage the arbitration case from our end. And it's very possible that the same thing is happening now. And it's very strange because the senators have approved it, the congressmen have approved it. Why is it not being sent to the president for signature?
There could be a sabotage, no? Yeah, it could
Yes,
be a
and
sabotage. Yeah.
it, it reflects badly on our institutions, because this could be a malign influence.
Absolutely. And speaking of malign influence, this is the last part I want to discuss with you, Justice. I know we started a little bit late. So now you have this report from Rappler in conversation with sources in the intelligence services in the Philippines. I suspect Nika, AFP, among others, saying that they have already identified a Chinese journalist who used to be a bureau chief of a Shanghai-based daily, who has been publishing not very much, but seems to be meeting a lot of people in Manila, and seems to be very busy. Every time there's an incident in the Ayungin Shoal or Rore, few days before or after, he's immediately meeting so many people, right? So he doesn't even need to ask leading questions. Immediately, things are gonna fall in his lap. Um, is there a serious ring of high quality Chinese spies? Because this person, for instance, was a bureau chief in Washington, so medyo operating it at the highest levels. Is China sending their ace team, or at least one of their best teams, to do some high quality espionage, and potentially may even explain what we have been discussing, this crazy sabotage, potential sabotage situation, and what has to be done, Justice Carpio, without us turning paranoid against anyone from China or any journalists from China, if even real journalism is allowed in a communist country like China.
Well, apparently we're being targeted by China, and you just have to look at uh, the agreement during Duterte's time, where they could put up cellular towers in all military camps nationwide. Can you just imagine that? DITO, which is affiliated with the China Telecoms, it's state-owned telecom company of China. It owns 40% of DITO, and is the biggest creditor of DITO. And and they were able to get the AFP uh, to allow them to put up towers, communication towers, in all military camps. And I understand the military, our Filipino military officers, fought a rearguard action to delay this until Duterte was out
While
of office,
Duterte
and
was
they
there, right?
refused.
Yeah, they held the line. Exactly. It's
Yeah,
not
they
just
held the
media.
line, and they
Military held the line
never
too. Yeah.
implemented it until Duterte left, and so they're pretty safe now. But this is part of that. It's a part of the subversion of our institutions by China, and it's very clear. It's very clear.
And what do you think we should do? Should we push ahead now with this Foreign Influence Act legislation that has been being passed? And what kind of a whole of nation approach should we have? Should our colleagues in the media and all, and colleagues in the academy, be a little bit double careful when they're dealing with some of these Chinese journalists without being prejudicial, unnecessarily?
Yes, we should revisit the Foreign Agent Registration Act. Uh, we have actually a law, but it was never used during the time of Marcos Sr. There was a law. It was passed, but we have to update that. And even the Confucius Institutes, UP, Ateneo, and some schools have Confucius Institutes, and it's one way. They establish a Confucius Institute in our campuses here, but there's no reciprocity. We cannot establish Rizal Institutes in China. So they can distribute materials on the 9 dash line, 10 dash line here, but we cannot distribute our counter arguments in China. So we have to look at this on a more even keel. If we allow them in our campuses, we should have also right at least to put up the same facilities in their campuses, and they will never agree because
Reciprocity, exactly.
yeah, they
Reciprocity.
will never agree. The moment we demand reciprocity, they will never agree.
Um, but will they accept if ever Kiboloy escapes to China in the coming months and all? Do you think, Justice, baka ngayon na baka ano ba yan, 3-in-1 ba nila yan? Isabay na nila si Kiboloy and Digong and Bato. Is that the plan? Eventually.
Well, I will not be surprised if that happens.
3-in-1 ang tawag ko dyan, 3-in-1. I mean, a lot of terms I threw out here sa mga podcast natin, parang ginagamit na ngayon yung Team Philippines versus Team China. Matagal ko na sinasabi yan, yung Grand Coalition. Ngayon naman tawag ko dyan 3-in-1. Baka isabay na lahat ng itong mga dodgy characters together. Isabay nila. Super thank you, Justice Carpio, for that really, really amazing conversation. I think everyone enjoyed this, and my apologies if we started a little bit later than usual. Thank you, Justice. Is there something you want to add before we close this episode, and hopefully next week continue on this conversation even on a more positive note? So you're really confident, no? September, no? So before filing of certificate of candidacy, more or less this ICC warrants of arrest are gonna. Siguro we're just not sure sinong kasama aside from, I don't know, Bato maybe or Digong, something like that. Ano bang hindi natin alam dyan? What are the known unknowns?
Well, the way what I'm hearing is that they'll probably have warrants of arrest issued in tranches. Maybe the gong will come out first, and then the second tier, the third tier, it will be in tranches.
Medyo thirst trap. Thirst trap yata ang tawag dyan sa Instagram. Medyo teaser. Then. Interesting times, Justice Scarpio. Interesting times. Keep safe, keep
Yes.
strong, mabuhay ka, and I hope to catch you next week. Obviously, for some people who are not familiar, I'm also launching this new kapihan, right? Sa Cafe Adriatico,
Yes,
and
we'll meet you
we're
at the
gonna launch it.
Kapihan. Okay.
Yes, and so this will be our own kapihan, and we have, God willing, inshallah, you, Justice Scarpio, of course, Secretary Llamas, Admiral Ong. So all stars yun, and with some folks also from the government side, so that it could be a kind of diverse conversation. Thank you very much, Justice Scarpio. Looking forward to catching up to you in person and also hopefully on Zoom if there's some developments soon. God bless po. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Richard. Thank you to our viewers.
As always po. God bless po.